All right, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen and individuals. My name is Dr. Josh Franco, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Cuyamaca College. Welcome to our workshop on American political economy. This is a new series, which I'll describe in a moment, but I appreciate those of you attending live. And for those of you watching the recording, I also appreciate you taking the time. So let's jump right in to this new workshop that I'm starting this summer. It's a series that's focused on defining, exploring, and discussing American political economy from the point of view of different individual, group, and organizational entities at the local, state, and national level using historical and contemporary news and events. This is our schedule for the summer of 2022. Today will be an overview of this area, this newer subfield in political science. Next week, we'll talk about the major questions doctrine, which I'm pretty excited to talk about and to discuss with you. This emerging doctrine of the Supreme Court. And then the future weeks, I haven't decided. So if you have topics that start to come to mind after you listen to the overview and you want me to dive into them, feel free to send me a Canvas message or an email or to attend a future iPoli-Sci workshop and let me know. Happy to cover areas or topics that you are interested in or would like to explore more. So for week one, an overview of an emerging field. So by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to first define American political economy, or APE, or some people are saying APE. Describe how APE departs from mainstream American politics, and then describe the 4 areas of APE. Let me put on my glasses so I can see a little more clearly and make sure my pen's working. Okay, good. So this is based off an open source document titled The American Political Economy, Markets, Power, and Metapolitics of U.S. Economic Governance in the Journal of the Annual Review of Political Science. I'm going to click open this page and let it show for us. And I'll post a link in the chat so you guys can check it out. This is a Creative Commons licensed article, which means it's freely available and you can read the whole article for yourself. It gives a healthy overview of this emerging field, and a lot of the content from today's lecture or presentation is drawn from this article and or the book that's associated with this article. So I just want to bring that to your attention. So first question is, what is American political economy? So methodologically eclectic, this field seeks to understand the interaction of markets and government in America's unequal and polarized polity. Though situated within American politics research, APE draws from comparative political economy to develop a broad approach that departs from American politics mainstream in 2 ways. First, APE focuses on the interactions of markets and governance, which is a peripheral concern in much of American politics research. And then secondly, it invokes a theoretical orientation attentive to what this emerging field of scholars calls metapolitics. So the processes of institution shaping, agenda setting, venue shopping that unfold before and alongside the more visible processes of mass politics that figure centrally in American political research. So that's a lot. So let's break down some of these terms and also kind of what is American politics. So starting off with what is American politics, normally the way it's understood in the field is that we have institutions and we have behavior. And the institutions that are of most interest and focus are the presidency, the Congress, and the courts, and specifically the Supreme Court. And when it comes to the behavioral field, you're either interested in the behavior of elites. So these are elected officials, how they vote, how they take actions, how they don't take actions, and also the behavior of the masses. So people like us who are members of our political system, and we can be super engaged, like we're paying attention to every piece of political news every day. We can be completely disengaged, which is like we have no understanding, knowledge, or care of what's going on, what we call those who are apathetic. But those are the 2 major branches of American politics. And when you think about American politics as a subfield, it's traditionally focused on what we call the last mile, right? So we're paying attention to how did people vote for president in 20 2020. How do people decide to get involved in politics or not? How do city councils and other local governments make decisions for their constituents? That's what we consider the last mile or the end of a political process, and focus largely on outcomes. But APE says that we need to think about it more broadly, not just the last mile, but the whole mile. So, like was mentioned before, AP departs from mainstream politics in two specific ways. It focuses on markets, the interaction of markets and governance. So what it's basically doing is bringing the economy and economic actors into our understanding of political institutions and behavior, and then focuses on metapolitics, which consists of these three elements of institution shaping, agenda setting, and venue shopping, which I'll define next. So what are markets? A simple definition of markets are markets for goods, services, labor, financial, and other sectors where commercial dealings are conducted. When we think of a market, we think of like going to Albertsons or Colleen's or Ralph's or some other supermarket. But when we think of markets in political science, we think of these sectors or spaces where there's transactions happening. So for example, a labor market is where I, as a political scientist looking for a job, I'm a member of the political scientist labor market, and I'm supplying my labor, and that there's places that are demanding my labor, like colleges and universities around the country. Or we can think about markets for goods. Like, I'm in the market for milk today because we're done with it. And Ethan asked me for milk, and I said, sorry, son, we don't have any milk right now. And he gave me a sad face. So we're going to go to Smart and Final after class and pick up some milk. But that's a good that we're looking for. So the way I'm demanding it, it's supplied by, in this case, Smart and Final, but it's really supplied by the dairy farmers who take care of the cows and milk them and produce it for people to consume. Next, we have governance. So governance is the process of elected officials, appointed officials, interest groups, and individuals discussing, debating, and deciding on public policies. Governance is like the wrap around term that captures basically all of the political policy processes and the people involved. Next, we have institution shaping, which refers to the ways in which institutions that embody and influence power relations are forged through political contestation over time. Basically, what this means is that, for example, we have what we call, we have the presidency, but the presidency didn't just show up one day and it is what it is as we know it. The presidency has developed over the past 200 years, and there have been some pivotal moments, both constitutionally, legislatively, judicially, that have shaped the power of the presidency and of that institution. And so institution shaping refers to those factors that are influencing that process of the shaping of this institution, and not just then, but also looking into the future, what that institution might become or look like. Next, we have agenda setting. So these are the actions by individuals and groups, so that some issues are what we call organized into politics, while others are organized out of politics. As a real contemporary and yet sad example is on gun control. For example, when we've had these very dramatic and tragic mass shootings, some people argue that it's not a time for politics to talk about it. What they're basically trying to do is set the agenda by saying, it's not a political issue. This is another type of issue, but this doesn't belong in the political sphere. So when people make that argument, what they're trying to do is set the agenda. And obviously in this dramatic and tragic events, others are arguing, no, this actually is a political issue, because it can only be solved by politics and by policy and by legislative action, either at the local, state, and or federal level. So when people try to organize things out of politics or bring them into politics, they're trying to set or change the agenda. Lastly, we have venue shopping. So these are actions by individuals and groups to use specific governmental bodies to advance their preferred policy outcome. For example, say I am the owner of an oil and gas company, and I'm situated in the state of Texas. I know that the state of Texas is pretty hospitable to my business model and the work that I do. But I might feel like there's pressures from the federal government to shape my business model in a way that I'm not happy with. And so I might look for a place to sue the federal government for its actions. And I could sue them in the state of Texas. I can sue them in the state of Louisiana. I can sue them in the state of Georgia or Florida. I can sue them in California because you might have a subsidiary or some wells or production areas in that state. But if you're venue shopping as an oil and gas company, what you're going to say is, let me find the federal district court that would be most sympathetic to my interest or concerns, and I'm going to go sue there, because then I'm going to get possibly a judge who's more favorable to ruling in my favor. That's venue shopping. Okay. Next are, what are the 4 areas of APE? First is the role of organized economic interest. Secondly is the embeddedness of race in American capitalism. Third is America's spatial political economy. And then fourth is coalitional dynamics through an APE lens. So let's unpack each of these. So what's the role of organized economic interest? Well, organized economic interest are individuals, businesses, and corporations that are focused not just on changing particular policies, but on insulating their preferred policy arrangements from partisan or political contestation. For example, a couple election cycles ago here in California, voters were asked to pass a proposition that would protect the gig economy or the gig industry, particularly Uber and Lyft and other gig type of companies, from being able to keep the type of employer-employee relationship with their workers. In this case, not an employee-employer relationship. They wanted to have it be an independent contractor relationship. So the organized economic interests of Uber and Lyft fund a political campaign to say, hey, people, you should pass this proposition, because if you don't, your cost of Uber and Lyft is going to go up. And most people, that's how they understood it. And they voted to pass the proposition. And what it's done is it's protecting that gig company and that gig industry. And now people are debating the outcomes or the results of that. So economic interest will work to shape their policy outcomes to their preferred favor. And it's important to note that it's against this backdrop of a starkly rising economic inequality. The study of American politics is returning to a vital topic, which is inequality of political influence. So mainstream Americanist scholarship has mostly sought to tackle this problem from within a behavioral framework. And what this means is political scientists have studied inequality from like, okay, if you don't have a lot of resources, if you're poor, you're less likely to vote. And if you're rich and you have a lot of resources, you're more likely to vote. And you're more likely to understand issues. You're more likely to be engaged versus the opposite. That's how people are deciding to be engaged, to vote, to participate in the political process. But it's not talking about this kind of broader systemic issues that are relevant to us. Next is the embeddedness of race in American capitalism. So no other rich democracy's political and economic development has been more defined by racial hierarchy than in the US. And this scholarship introduces or brings this concept of what they call racial capitalism to the forefront. And there's four core claims or pillars of this concept. First is that American capitalism was built on the expropriation of Black labor. What they mean by that is because individuals who were Black were enslaved and were constitutionally allowed to be enslaved, that it's embedded, it's created a system where people basically could build wealth, build capital, and others who couldn't because they were treated as property and not as people. Second is this notion of whiteness, which has always conferred not only political and social privileges, but key economic benefits. We've seen this through obviously the institution of slavery. We also seen this in federal and state laws that basically discriminate against African Americans and other people of color, from getting loans to buying property to owning businesses to operating companies. And so if you have a system that not only segregates people, but does not permit them to participate in the broader economic sphere, then it creates a capitalism that's based off of race. Next, you have the segmentation of markets and the division of workers along racial lines that undergird this system. So when you say that, well, you can't live here because you're African American, there were laws that permitted that. And it's taken centuries for those laws to not only be overturned, or I would say decades, but then the impact of that on generations doesn't just start and end with one, it perpetuates over time. So, for example, here in California in the late 1950s and 1960s, they passed fair housing laws to ensure that, or at least legally say that it was illegal to not sell a home to someone who was African American or a person of color or minority. So this segmentation of the markets is not just, it happened, right? But laws allowed for it, and then laws had to be changed so that it would prohibit it. But the enduringness of those prior laws are things that we observe today. And then lastly is the perceived naturalness of market outcomes that mask these profound racial inequalities and the power-laden processes that reproduce them. So nowadays we might think that, okay, well, that's just because, person has this or they don't have that. But if you don't look at the history of why and how people got to where they are, you might say, well, that's just the way the market works. And the reality is like, no, that's not the way the market worked. It was the way the market was structured by laws, by rules, by regulations. And it advantaged some and it disadvantaged others. Next is America's spatial political economy. So this is the ways in which economic and political activity are geographically co-distributed and the political consequences of these interrelationships. So viewed from a comparative perspective, American political institutions place an unusual priority on spatial arrangements, both because of the prominence of territorial representation, such as single-member districts or a powerful US Senate, the Electoral College, and because of the atypical spatial fragmentation of political authority. The key thing here is that we have a federal government and we have 50 state governments. And then in each of those 50 states, they have counties and cities that have some level of autonomy. And you basically have thousands of mini markets, mini regulated markets by cities and counties, 50 other regulated markets by states, and then you have one blanket one for the federal level. But because we give prominence to those local and subnational or those state level ones, we're basically have a spatial economy. So for example, California will give a tax break for people to put solar panels on the roofs. And they'll also pass a law that says you have to put solar panels on new homes. Other states don't even talk about it. Right. So that's a different legal structure and incentive structure or punishment structure that's designed in one state compared to others. And we can go down the list. Right. Texas, for example, will incentivize oil and gas development by tax breaks and property tax breaks and maybe other incentives, while California doesn't do that. Our fourth area is coalition. So these are groups of groups, social, cultural, economic, religious, and political, that see to shape economic and political governance. So increasingly, the two US parties are national coalitions aligned with organized groups that have strong policy demands and are capable of operating across multiple venues. Intent on entrenching policies economic-wide, these coalitions must balance their national spanning goals for governance with their need to win pluralities of geographically situated voters whose electoral clout and potential for mobilization reflect their location in the spatial political economy. That's basically a long way of saying that coalitions will, especially the well-resourced and the broader reaching ones, will have national level efforts, state level efforts, local level efforts to shape the dialogue, to shape the agenda, to shape the outcomes of policy. And they have to do it city by city, county by county, state by state. So why do we want to explore APE? Well, an overarching lesson of recent APE work is that scholars need to be attentive to the metapolitics of institution shaping, agenda setting, and venue shopping in order to understand the terrain on which more visible political battles are playing out. Students of American politics often start with the focus on either voting behavior or on particular formal institutions like the Congress or state governments. Now, drawing in part from comparative political economy, APE scholars generally start with the focus on how inherited institutions shape and constrain contemporary politics, including by marginalizing some groups and empowering others, and how the powerful can influence the political agenda and quote unquote play across the full political field in pursuit of their interest. So if you're interested and want to learn more, you can check out a website on the consortium on the American political economy. You can also check out and buy this textbook, or this book, excuse me, this edited volume called The American Political Economy, Politics, Markets, and Powers. And I'll end with this, which is, this is an emerging subfield within political science and within American politics. And it's very fascinating to see it presented and clearly organized in the sense of how does this differ from other fields like, let's say, American political behavior or American political institutions or elections and representation and the like. And at least for me, as someone who's been trained in kind of the general way of thinking of politics is institutions and economy and cognition and behavior, I was really fascinated with this presentation of how to think about things in like not just snapshots, but over time. And for me personally, I think it's very appealing intellectually and also practically. So I'm looking forward to having conversations about this with you over the next 2 months as we explore the application of APE to current and historical events and news. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and move us to the discussion. We have a few minutes here. I appreciate you taking the time to listen in, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So take care.